Welcome to The Alignment Show, featuring conversations with folks who have taken steps to identify their highest values and align their lives around them. Time on this earth is not unlimited, and you may be seeking to make sure you spend your time on things that matter to you. These conversations will encourage you and support you in doing so. Now, let's meet this week's guest on The Alignment Show. And good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time it is in your part of the world. Welcome back once again to The Alignment Show. My name is Don King, and I will be your host. And as we're getting started here, a little reminder, as folks who are regular listeners are used to hearing, we have a book release coming up, Medium Well, which is the second installment in the Sparklight Chronicles, is going to be available on my store a week from today. And then should be out in all the regular retailers about a week after that. So if you have an interest in following along with that, you can always get the first chapter, if I can say it right here, the first chapter of that. If you want to just kind of like doing a cheese sample, you know, we got it going across. It's supposed to be going across down there. Yep, let's get it going. Come on. It's like running a starship sometimes. DonKing.com/medium well first. For those of you on audio only, you can get the first chapter for free and check it out, just like checking out the cheese at Kroger. Or you can just go to DonKing.com/medium well, and that will take you to whatever the current outlet for that book is. Speaking of books, as you guys know, regular listeners here, we don't just talk to writers, but we wind up talking to writers a lot of time because I think that's a lot of what's involved in becoming a writer. You have to think about what matters to you because it's not an easy profession to be in. Well, I'm just amazed by our guest today. I have been listening to him for a long time. We just met for the first time this week in terms of making a connection, though. He is so prepared. He's not only a writer, but a speaker. And I've got several introductions I could use. I'm going to actually use the one that he's put together for when he is a speaker. He says of himself, and I love this description, a self-confessed book nerd. Mark Leslie Lefebvre has worked in the book industry since 1992, the same year that his first short story was published. He was bitten by the book-selling bug in the same way that storytelling and writing captured his imagination at a young age. Mark has worked in virtually every type of bookstore, which, by the way, was something I've always wanted to do. He's worked in independent chain, big box, online, academic, and digital bookstores. He thrives on innovation and imagining what is possible, when technology merges with the creative spirit. He has more than 20 books to his name. This includes both fiction and nonfiction. He writes under the pseudonym of Mark Leslie, which he says is to save people from having to spell or pronounce Lefebvre. We'll actually see it a little bit later. And he has spoken to audiences in Canada, the United States, the UK, France, and Germany. I'm just very glad to have him on here today, and we'll talk more about the books that he has out. Many of those books are to help other writers to do so effectively. Let's go ahead and get on stage Mark Leslie Lefebvre. Mark, welcome to the Alignment
Show. Great to see you. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. It is truly an honor. I told Mark when we were setting this up, we've had Joe Penn on, we've had Rachel Herron, Kevin Tumlinson is coming up in a few weeks. As far as I'm concerned, this is my dream team, and I just really appreciate you guys coming on. I'll go ahead and out you just a little bit. Mark is not at the top of his voice. This is sort of like the show must go on. But he's here anyway. He's got a little bit of strep throat going on. Thank you for going on anyway. It would have been so easy to say, I just don't feel well. But what I have observed of you over the years is that nothing seems to stop you. You have an amazing, to me, amount of stuff going on, including a master's program at I know it's in Colorado. I can't remember which school.
Western Colorado University. Yeah.
There we are. And it's a master's in publishing, which I had not heard of before. So obviously you have a lot of connection with publishing and writing. Let's start with 1992, although I want to go back before that.
Yeah.
But for our discussion, you started at a bookstore the same year that you started with, I guess I would say, publishing, because you wrote the story, I guess, before 92.
Yeah, I mean, I've been getting rejection since about the age of 15. I started submitting my submissions. Wasn't until I was, 20 or 21, whatever year I graduated from university, that the first story I sold finally got into print, which is probably a year after I sold the story.
Oh, yeah, and things moved more slowly, or still move more slowly, when we're looking at traditional publishing.
Yeah, this was with a quarterly magazine. So you would sell it, I sold it in probably 1991 sometime, and it got published in 92. That was the year I graduated. That was the year I got a part-time job as a bookseller at Kohl's on Spark Street in Ottawa. And I've never looked back. It was such a dream job to work in the industry that I'd always wanted to be a part of.
So that was sort of like the day job in a way, supporting the creative aspirations.
Yeah. Well, I had multiple day jobs, right? I was working part-time at a bookstore. I was working as a theater tech at Carleton University's theater operations, working at PM Displays, setting up trade shows, and I also had a part-time job as a security guard. So I had all these part-time jobs. And then eventually, after I think it was about a year or so, I started full-time book selling. I kept several of the part-time jobs, like weekends, evenings, because, well, I'll be honest with you, working retail is a minimum wage job for the most part, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. In fact, I was pulling up something else here. I asked Mark some questions ahead of time to get ready for this, and more so than most of my guests, he had to answer everything like on three levels. Like, there's nonfiction, fiction, and nonfiction for writers. There's as a writer, as a book industry rep, as a person. And I want to share a little bit of that. He said, I asked, how would you describe yourself? As a writer, chills and thrills. Book industry rep, helping you navigate the business of writing and publishing. As a person, everybody counts or nobody counts. And I hear that coming through from you in all of these roles. I'm curious about how the thrills and chills interfaces with if everybody counts or nobody counts. Because I'm talking too much here, Mark, but I want to set this up. I was listening to one of your podcast episodes. By the way, folks, he's a podcaster too. And it was the most recent episode. Oh gosh, my brain doesn't function as well as it used to. With the gentleman who wrote the book about harnessing the Arctic.
Oh, yeah. And of course, I'm drawing a blank too. But yeah, that was this last week's episode. Yeah.
Exactly. And as you wound that up, you were talking about how you can use writing to impact your world. And what struck me is you were talking about how using fiction to impact that world. Yeah. And I think that's something that's always been a part of something close to your heart, even at age 15. So how did all of that come together, especially as far as the writing thrillers and chillers?
It's just, yeah, I think when you write fiction, you can obviously layer in elements that can potentially help inspire someone, help them feel something, teach them something, etc. And it's less obtrusive as the nonfiction that's just in your face. So that's what I was thinking of. But so chills and thrills came out of the fact that most of the stuff I write in fiction is speculative in nature and tends to lean on the darker side. I'm a big chicken. I still believe in the boogeyman. There is a monster under my bed. You can't tell me there isn't one. So I'm afraid of the dark. So I'm a big chicken, and a lot of the stuff I write tends to be macabre, because when I muse and in speculative fiction, the focus is on what if, and the what if tends to be somewhat supernatural or out of this world or just different, right? Whether you take science or fantasy or dark fantasy or whatever. And so most of my books have some element of chills, true ghost stories,
Mhm.
horror, or thrills. Even my urban paranormal a fantasy series, a contemporary fantasy series, A Canadian Werewolf. Yeah, there's humor in it, but humor is interlaced into almost everything I do. That just comes naturally.
Mhm.
But when I was looking at a logo for my Mark Leslie author brand a few years ago, I wanted to try and land on something that would quickly tell people what they were getting into. And for the most part, with when Mark Leslie is the brand, it's going to be a chill or a thrill, typically, even if there's laughs and humor involved. And so that's how I landed on that one. I'm going to go back to Nobody Counts, or everyone counts, or nobody counts. And kudos to Michael Connolly, his fictional character Harry Bosch, from the Bosch novels. That's his mantra.
Ah.
And when I read that, it made so much sense. And I apply that myself whenever I'm interacting with people, remembering that there's not something that anyone can't teach me. If I can do all the negatives in there and still have this come up as the way I wanted to say it, but I can learn from anyone, anywhere, at any time, because everybody has something of value, and that's an important thing to remember.
Mm.
And so that kind of drives me personally. And then, of course, in the middle there is the different hat that I wear. I have so many hats. I had to go bald just so it was easier to take them on and off, right? But just from taking them on and off, I probably wore my head out.
There you go.
And that's the business of writing and publishing. That's where I tacked Lefebvre back on, so people can at least differentiate and say, okay, if he's tacking the Lefebvre name back on, he may actually be talking about the business of writing and publishing, which is something I'm really passionate about.
No, and I hear an interface between logic and emotion there. You were talking about how the fiction and the nonfiction would come together. Um, Tell us a little more about how your fiction writing helps you with your nonfiction, how the
Yeah.
nonfiction helps the fiction writing.
So in fiction writing, and even in nonfiction writing, I do a significant amount of research. Now, I'm a pantser. I make stuff up. I decide, okay, the book's going to be called this. I think it's going to have this happen in it. Let's just go to town. And I'm a discovery writer. Let's just see what happens when I write. Or as Dean Wesley Smith says, writing into the dark, because we'll just light the road up just a few feet ahead of us and see where we're going. Sometimes we have an idea of where we're going to get to at the end, but the road there is the discovery, the thrill is what's makes that so interesting. But when I'm doing fiction, even though I pants, even though I'm not really sure where I'm going to go, for the most part, I don't really follow an outline except at a high level. I do a lot of research. My Canadian Werewolf series is a good example. I will do a lot of research. Michael Andrews lives in New York City. I don't live in New York City. I've only been to the city maybe a dozen or more times in my lifetime. Most time I've spent there is maybe a week at a time. So I don't know all the ins and outs. So I have to do a lot of research in terms of the places where he's going. And I want it to be realistic. And if he's walking from this point to that point, I need it to take the proper amount of time. If he's taking a cab across the city at a certain time of day, I want it to be realistic. So I'm very, very particular about that. I need to understand where people are in movement and place and time. When I'm researching for the True Ghost Story books, of course, there's a lot of research involved in getting one or more stories from different people, cross-referencing them, acknowledging the location, the history, the people, all of those elements. And then even in some of the books I've done some trivia books about some of my favorite movies, Die Hard and Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. A significant amount of research. I mean, watching the movie, dozens and dozens of times, making notes, watching the director's commentary, reading articles with interviews with the actors and the whatever, all the things I can find. And I really love absorbing that information. And so even in my fiction, I'll find elements from my True Ghost Story research that end up getting into fiction, because it's like, oh, that was an interesting thing about this building. Well, I can apply that here. Or here's a character that I encountered who I didn't end up using, or I used in a different way, that I can maybe apply this character trait to one of my characters in the novel. So there's really a really interesting crossover in how I love to reference my research. Because again, I'm of the mantra for writing of reduce, reuse, recycle, and thinking about your author IP. How can I take something? And I'll give you a quick example. Haunted Hamilton is a book I licensed to Dundurn, Canada's largest independent publisher. It's a great book. It's out in ebook, it's in print. They have the audiobook rights, but they've never made an audiobook. So when voicemap.com, when they contacted me and said, hey, we'd like to do some walking tours, I realized, okay, I don't have the audio rights to this book, so I can't do an audio version of the book, but I can go back to the original research and I can re-script a half-hour guided walking tour. So relicensing my IP in different ways based on the initial research, because I wasn't drawing from the book so much as I was drawing from the research that went into the book. And so I think it's really important as a creator that sometimes you go back to the well. You sometimes go back to the well and draw from the same water, but you make something different with it. To go into a cooking analogy. So I think that's something I'd like to do, because it feels like all this work I did, I don't want it to go to waste. I'm going to leverage it as much as I can.
It occurs to me that, let's see how to put this. One of the main reasons I do this podcast is because it gives me an excuse to have conversations with people that I wouldn't otherwise get to have. It almost sounds like that writing gives you an excuse to dig into the stuff that you would love to dig into anyway. It's a way of leveraging that sort of thing.
Oh, for sure. And like I said, I'm a big chicken. So, I'm not going to be the superhero that Michael Andrews is, going and saving people and throwing himself into danger and stuff like that. I'm a big chicken. I'm not going to go into the haunted house and investigate. So a lot of the writing that I can do allows me to imagine being in those situations. So it's definitely and it's cathartic in many ways too, because I can explore my deepest fears in the fiction by putting a character in that situation and then trying to figure out, well, how does this person deal with it compared to how I would deal with it, compared to how some other character would deal with the same thing. And there's always interesting story that can come out of that.
And I'm thinking also, it's especially in line with the theme of the alignment show about living your values, valuing your life. Your process seems to be a great, I don't know if metaphor is not the right term here, a great tool set, a great approach to just navigating life. As writers, we always have that conversation about plotter or pantser. I told somebody not too long ago, in life, we're all pantsers. Does that kind of resonate with how, okay, here's a related question. Okay. When you were 15 years old or 20 or even 25, would you have ever thought, when I am whatever age you are now, I want to be a speaker and a publisher? And, in other words, did you plot this, or have you pantsed your way here in life?
I have pantsed my way here in life knowing one thing. I have always loved story. I've loved storytelling from the time I was a kid, playing with my Fisher-Price figurines, telling myself stories that it entertained me as an only child. Then, putting those stories on paper. So, in all of those things, when you think about it, they're all storytelling. Being a speaker, storyteller. Being a writer, storyteller. Even teaching people about the business of writing and publishing, storyteller. So I did know storyteller. It was kind of like, oh, I have a title for this book, but I have no idea what the details are going to be. We'll figure it out when we get there. And I've been so lucky. I've been so fortunate along the way. There's a really great Rush quote. I'm a huge fan of the Canadian rock trio Rush. The point of the journey is not to arrive. And that's one of the lyrics from one of their songs. And it's kind of like, it's the journey, not the destination. Yeah, the destination is important, but it's the journey. When you think about great stories and great tales, it's not about the arrival. It's about how to get to the arrival and all of the adventures that can happen along the way. And it's a reminder to me to embrace those adventures. Neil Peart, the drummer from Rush, said, adventures suck while you're having them. But they become fruit for great stories later on. It's like, not a good thing when this was happening to me, but this will be a funny story one day that I can tell to my friends.
Well, it is one of the things I tell my clients and students. When you're a writer or a speaker, no matter what happens to you, at least it's fodder.
Yeah.
And so the classic storytelling or the classic story structure about a focal character facing a challenge and the
Yeah.
process of facing that challenge, he or she grows or changes.
Yeah.
So that's reflective of life, because life is challenging.
Yeah.
Um, it seems like to me that you have grown more, though, maybe than most people. That's the whole idea behind the story. How have you changed? Let's delve into that journey a little bit more. You've always been a storyteller.
Yeah.
When did you know that? I mean, we always hear from writers about I started writing as soon as I could hold a pencil.
Yeah.
You first started trying to publish at 15. What was the realization before that you were going to be a storyteller as opposed to a musician or an
Right.
actor or some other creative outlet?
It's really funny because I'm very introverted, actually, and a lot of people are shocked to learn that. I call myself an omnivert,
Yeah, me too.
where I can play the role, I can act the role. I had a great manager in the book industry that reminded me that when you're on the sales floor, you're acting the role of the world's best bookseller, and I would apply that. Okay, what's expected of me, and what am I going to deliver? Just like and again, I have a background in theater. I did a lot of theater in university and even in high school skits. I think the earliest inclination was not just me fascinating myself. And again, when I was playing with the Fisher Price figurines, I didn't just have little things I imagined. I had epic continuing saga adventures that would go on for weeks and weeks and weeks, where there would be continuity and storyline, just like in the Spider-Man comic books I've been reading. But I think the first inclination, I want to make people feel something,
Mhm.
came from being a class clown, a little bit of a class clown, and you're like, "Oh, I can pretend to be alfalfa," because I had hair at one point, and then stick my, wet my hair and stick the hair up like alfalfa, and it would make people laugh. And I'm like, "Oh, that's power right there. I can make people feel good by putting that out there." Now, why did I not become a stand-up comedian? Well, maybe because I'm not that funny.
Mm.
But I did love being able to make people feel things, and you can do that in speaking, you can do that in teaching, and you can do that in writing. Now, I did want to get into teaching. Um, Again, what does a writer do? My mom had always given me this great advice. She's like, "Hey, if you want to be a writer, you better have a good job." And
Mm.
that is true. And I'm not saying this to poo-poo writers and the dream of writing, but the reality in both traditional publishing and in self-publishing is that if you want to be a writer, you better have a good day job.
Mhm.
Only because most people are not going to make a lot of money. Now, that being said, that's one of the reasons I went into book selling. I thought, okay, I want to be associated with the industry I love so much. I love books. I just can't get enough of books. So I think there's that element of wanting to do something so badly and not caring that there's no guarantee that you're going to make money in
Mm.
it, and just enjoying that. I always say this to writers, and I think this is such a really important thing, is writing the books that resonate with you, writing the books that have meaning, and there are things that you're passionate about. Because if you only focus on trying to write to market and for the branding and the marketing exercise and the sales, because your hope is you're going to be a millionaire and sell a million copies of this book, this chances are really likely that's not going to happen. But if you spend the time and passion and energy on something you really truly believe and feel, you won just by working on it. And if the book sells and lots of people buy it and love it, then that's a bonus. But you start off winning, and as opposed to setting yourself up for failure. I mean, that happened with when I published the Canadian Mounted, which is planes a trivia guide to planes, trains, and automobiles. It was a passion project. I've always wanted to write about this movie. I loved it so much with Steve Martin and John Candy from 1984.
Yes.
And I just watch the movie every year. I love it so much. It makes me cry. It makes me laugh. There's just so many great elements to it. And I figured there would be 15 people in the world that would want to read this book. I didn't care. I put my heart and my passion and my soul into it. And lo and behold, There were more than 15 people who felt strongly about that movie. But again, even if it hadn't sold, I still did it. Yay! I invested this time in something that, even if it made one person happy. And that's the other thing, right? When you put a lot of passion and energy and personal experience into it. And Don, you've probably experienced this with your books where you're sharing anecdotes and stories. Other people are going to see themselves in that and go, "Oh, I'm not alone." And that's
Yes.
one of the most powerful things we can do as writers and storytellers is remind people they are not alone.
Just to be able to touch people on an emotional level.
Yeah.
And some of what I do in coaching people in effective speaking, I will say that the average person will define communication as a transfer of ideas, and there's a lot of reasons why that's not accurate. A better inaccurate definition is transfer of emotion.
Yeah.
And it sounds like you have really tapped into that.
Yeah.
Something else that you have brought out here. I know you co-authored a book with Joe Penn. We talk about Joe a lot on here. Um, One of the things I know from her is she frequently will talk about, as writers or as authors, uh, you will usually put one item ahead of two others. The three F's. There's fame, freedom, or fortune. And it's not that it's one at the exclusion of the others, but one comes first.
Yeah.
And as we've brought out here before, if those are your primary values, fame, freedom, or fortune, there's easier ways to achieve any of those than being an author.
Yes.
And
Exactly.
but
Yeah.
but still, once you are satisfying your primary life value, among those three, there's probably one that will be at the forefront. Joe's been very clear that freedom is more important than fortune to her, for example.
Yeah.
So what would you say among those three is the primary driver for your writing, given that
Yeah.
it's not the primary value because there's
Yeah.
easier
Well,
ways to do it.
I think like Joe, freedom.
Mhm,
But I'll be honest with you, there's a narcissistic part of me that
mhm.
leans towards fame. And that's something that it's a fickle mistress. And, and I always have to, but I realize it's freedom. All of the decisions and all of the choices that I have made in my career, if I were to look at what drove me, yeah, there were times when finances drove me to make a decision. But most of the decisions that I made were related to freedom, wanting to explore what I could do if I could just do this. And
The what
again,
if?
not focusing on, is this gonna make me rich or is this gonna make me famous? No, is this something I want to do?
Mm,
So, I think freedom's probably been the primary driving force in most of my decisions, but I'll be honest with you, and yes, I have chosen fortune and fame, at different times. I just
right.
I can't help that. And I think anyone's gonna have, they're gonna toggle on and off and change over time. Well, for this particular thing, I was thinking more about the money, right? Or I was thinking more about, well, this could look good on my
Well, and
resume.
depends on where you are in your stage of life. I would
Yeah.
imagine.
But I'm not. I mean, money and I aren't together very often, and I think that's because I'm not very I'm not very very frugal. I would rather spend something in order to experience
Mm,
something than sit on a bunch of cash. Like that's not going to make me happy.
yeah.
Which again, probably not. I'm not a good financial planner. I'll tell you that much. I recognize things I can't do. I can't part my hair. I have none to part. I'm probably not the best person to give financial advice to someone else, but that's why I don't offer financial advice, except telling my son, "Don't do what Dad did."
Well, our family motto is if you can't be a good example, at least be a horrible warning. So, there you are.
Ah,
As long as we're throwing those kind of things out, I tell friends who have the same hairstyle as you, he still carries a comb. He just can't part with it.
yeah.
So,
I
You know,
love that one.
if you feel
All
free to
right.
make use of it. I stole it somewhere. I just can't remember
Well,
where.
I'm stealing that one. I'm probably gonna put it. I put dad jokes out on the wall on the front of the house every day for people to read. That's a good one because a
Yeah,
lot of the people in the
absolutely.
neighborhood know I'm bald.
Okay, so a couple of related questions here. Then, in light of what we were just talking about, you've probably heard some version of this one before. That is, if you had to give up everything that you do but one thing, and you had won the lottery or whatever the Canadian equivalent is, where you didn't have to worry about money, what's the one thing that would remain?
Storytelling.
Would it
And
matter what
that's me
form?
cheating. That's yeah, what form? That's the thing. I'm cheating because going, well, I can storytell by writing stories and I can do nonfiction books and fiction books and I can do
Hmm,
whatever. But I think writing in general would be the thing that
okay.
would remain if I had to narrow it down.
Okay. Now let's tweak that question just a bit. If you hadn't won the lottery, so you had to make a living somehow, there are way too many people who think, oh, I hate my job, but I've got to make a living. So what we're trying to do is put these things together.
Yeah.
The thing that among the many things that you love doing, but you could only do one of them and had to make a living at it, what would combine being able to at least make a living, not become rich maybe, but
Yeah.
at least make a living, but would also feed your soul a bit?
Yeah, you know what? It's actually helping writers. It's working, consulting, and the work. And again, I'm lucky because I get to do that every day, only because it can bring in income, which is needed. But then I can help train and teach and cultivate and nourish and prop up other people. And in even in my role as a consultant, I I am not a six-figure author. I make a decent living from my writing. I have had clients and authors that I've coached and mentored shoot way past me, and I love that so
Mm,
much. It's not kind of like, "Hey, do what I do and you'll be rich like me." No, do the things I don't do. Here's the things I think would work for you, and then watching them make it their own, come up with a plan on their own. Again, because I'm not much of a planner. I just have ideas and then making it happen. I
mm,
love that so much. So the idea of making income in a way that can build other people up, that feeds my soul.
mm, mm. And you have unique insights from not only your writing, but having worked as a bookseller. You worked with Kobo,
Yeah.
which a lot of my listeners in the US, they're not familiar with it. Kobo, and correct me if I'm wrong here, I think they are the biggest bookseller in Canada and throughout much of the world.
Kobo was born out of Canada's major chain, Chapters Indigo, major book chain,
Mm,
and is, I guess, Canada's answer to Kindle, the Kindle, the ebook. And Kobo is in more countries around the world than Kindle, and their office was right here in Toronto. They are now part of the Rakuten organization, the much larger Japanese company Rakuten.
mhm,
There's still a lot of autonomy, and their CEO Michael Tamblyn is, one of the few people I would take a bullet for. I got to work for Michael for 6 years at Kobo, building the self-publishing platform there, and it was one of the best experiences of my life. He is such a great leader and such a beautiful book nerd as well. And so that company really has a lot of that bookish love to it. And all of the people that I worked with at Kobo and I'm still in contact with are just amazing, amazing people. So that was 6 years out of my life that was just. But again, everything. When I look at every single step along the way,
mm,
I didn't plan these things out. I can't say that I've stayed anywhere for a long time that I didn't absolutely love and give 100% of myself to, because I really enjoyed the people I worked with. I really enjoyed the interactions I got to do. I really enjoyed some of the freedoms that I was allowed in the roles. When Michael Tamblyn hired me at Kobo, he put me in a desk, a laptop, and a phone. He said, "Okay, figure out what we're going to do to support self-publishing."
mm,
Okay, go for it. Off you go. Figure this out.
mm,
That excites me. When I was talking to Chris Austin, the CEO of Draft to Digital, we were at a writers conference in Florida, Novelists Inc., and we were just talking late into the night, having some cocktails on the beach, And it was kind of like the idea of getting to work with the good folks at Draft to Digital was because kind of like a and it was kind of funny because like, yeah, I want to work with really cool people who are passionate and most importantly care about what they do. They care that they're not in it for a quick buck, that they're there to make a positive difference. And that, yes, the money is nice, but that drives me more than any of the money. It's always got to be, is this something? Is this something I can feel good about at the end of the day? Selling books, yeah. I think books change lives. They make people's lives better. The writers, the readers, especially when you connect the right thing. I could sell books, 24/7. I
Yeah.
couldn't sell shoes. I like shoes, and I think they're important. You kind of need certain shoes and stuff like that, but I can't sell just anything. I have to sell something I truly believe in, and so that's where I've been in situations where I'm like, "Yeah, this isn't me. I can't do this with a clear conscience, or I can't do this because I'm not giving it my all."
Mhm, mhm. And for clarity, for people who don't know, you're working with Draft to Digital right now.
Yeah, yeah. I have a part-time consultant position as the director of business development with Draft to Digital, which means I get to explore different partners and companies that they can work with, new platforms that they can publish to, different partnerships that may result in authors being offered some sort of coolness, a discount on a service that they need, or access to something they may not be able to get otherwise. And again, I get to work with the coolest people. Like, it's just, I'm so fortunate. I have been, Don. I have to say this. I am one of the luckiest people I've ever known.
Mm,
I've walked, fallen backwards into all kinds of amazing people that I've met and experiences I've been fortunate enough to be a part of. And I can't say, I mean, I've made a lot of mistakes along the way, and I've probably done things that I regret doing. I wish I could go and change some of those, but I wouldn't change anything else.
mhm, mhm. Yeah, yeah. Well, and the Draft to Digital thing, just for a moment, one of the books that you wrote is Wide for the Win.
Yeah. Yeah.
And for folks listening to the program, this is not, as we've said, it's not primarily a writer's program, but pulling back the curtain, I think people are a little curious about what goes on with writers and authors, and there's a lot of readers out there.
Yeah.
Let's say just a bit, as
Yeah.
we're a little over time at this point, but I want to
Yeah.
probe this a bit.
Sure.
Um, the concept of wide,
Yeah.
you can, you may be able to make more money quicker by focusing on one particular outlet, the river in Brazil.
Yeah.
Um, but there are reasons for writers with a long-term career not to put them down. No,
Yeah.
I don't mean put the writers down, not to put the river down.
Yeah.
Um, but there's reasons for going wide. If we can
Yeah.
just say a little bit about what is that and
Yeah.
why.
So yeah, it's the exclusivity to Amazon for ebooks and with Kindle Unlimited for page reads. I equate it to everyone counts or nobody counts. It's the same sort of thing.
Mm, okay.
Um, if you do that, yeah, it's easier. You only have to focus on one store. It's great, and I'm not going to judge anyone who does it because writers have to do what they have to do, and I get that and I respect that. But the way I look at it is, I want somebody to be able to read any of my books in almost any format that they can access it in. And that means libraries. And if you're exclusive to Kindle Unlimited, my books will not be available in libraries. And a whole bunch of other platforms. If they're an Apple person who only buys things on Apple or Barnes and Noble or Kobo or whatever, they're not going to be able to get my stuff. So my thought is, yeah, it works 100% of the, well, it doesn't work 100% of the time, but there's 100% of the time there's a chance you're going to sell to people who are on Kindle and only read on Kindle. But there's 100% chance you're never going to sell to those other people on all the other platforms. And I want to be able to say to people who are interested in any of my books, you can go to any library. And if the audiobook, the ebook, print book are available, they can get them. They have access to them. And that should not limit anyone because I so believe and value libraries. So my mentality or my thought as a writer is is just putting my stuff into as many different formats and platforms as possible so that anyone who's interested in checking it out or consuming that material, there's less friction for them to get it. It's like if they look on Kobo, they'll find it. If they look on Apple, they'll find it. If they look on Barnes& Noble, they'll find it. If they go to their local library, they'll find it. And that to me is so critical, because if somebody wants to get something that I've written, I want them to be able to get it, not to be restricted. Oh, you can only get it at this one place. So again, no negative for anyone who chooses to do that, but I can't choose to do that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And speaking about those books, one of the things we want to do is make sure people know how to find your books, your activity. I'm going to share here your website for those who are able to see on the screen, and then we will also we'll put all of these in the show notes. We're going to say them out loud as well. So here we've got markleslie.ca.
Yeah.
And be sure you're hearing that, folks. It's not .com, markleslie.ca.
Very Canadian. Very Canadian.
Yes, absolutely. Canadian. And I was going to mention, considering how things are going in this country, but also how hard it is for Americans to immigrate to Canada these days. I was going to ask you if you could adopt me. But that's another discussion. So right here on Mark's website, we've got his books, we've got his consulting. Look at all those books there. There's for the authors, paranormal nonfiction, Canadian werewolf series, other fiction. My goodness, I mean, talk about active. And then there's also links up here for the coaching and consulting, the podcast. In fact, speaking of the podcast, let's take a look at Stark Reflections. Yeah. And I wanted to ask you where the Stark came from with this. Here's the episode we were just talking about, by the way.
Yeah, Jeff Kramer with Infinite Resources. So Stark, my best friend Steve and I had a dream when we were kids. He wanted to be an animator. I wanted to be a writer. We thought maybe one day we'll create our own Disney kind of company. And we'll call it Stark Entertainment. When we were in college, we created a DJ service. And this is back in cassette tape DJing, back in the late 80s, early 90s. We had a company called Stark Entertainment, and we DJ'd. We did dances and stuff like that. So when I went to self-publish my first book in 2004, Steve, who's a graphic designer, I said, "Hey, Steve, I'm going to self-publish, but I want to hide," because in 2004, you weren't proud about that. You kind of hid the fact that you self-published. He created a Stark logo for me. So Steve and Mark, he got the first 2 letters. I got the last 3. And that's where Stark came from. So that was the company I founded in 2004, and that's the brand I've using. So when I went to do release a podcast, I thought, well, I like to take a look at the realities. Now, I am an optimist, but I call it Stark Reflections because I always want to be, while optimistic, I want to be realistic about the industry. And I didn't want to blow smoke up anyone's rear ends. Yes, I'm optimistic, and yes, I get passionate and excited about stuff, but I wanted to just say, here's the positives about traditional publishing and the negatives, and here's the positive about self-publishing and the negatives. And in any situation, I try to balance it. Even in the Wide for the Wind book, 400-page book, I have a chapter dedicated to why an author may not want to publish wide, because I wanted to consider the alternative perspective and help people make the right decision.
Truly serving there. For folks who are on here audio only, we'll mention, I think this is probably one of your followers that is commented, "Good morning."
Hey, Justin.
Yeah. Hi, Justin. Glad you are here with us today. This will be preserved for posterity and all the replays. So thanks, Justin. How do I get that off there? There we go.
Oh, the technology.
Yeah, I got to remember where the buttons are there. So we haven't said Stark Reflections out loud for the audio listeners. So again, that website is starkreflections.ca. And we'll have all of those in the show notes. As we're getting ready to wrap up here, Mark, one of the things I always like to ask a guest, there's probably something that you wish that I had asked that I didn't. What might that be, and what would your answer to that be?
Okay. You didn't ask me, "Hey, Mark, if we see each other, can I buy you a beer?" Yeah.
Okay, yeah. And I know you are a fan of microbreweries. Am I saying that right?
I love craft brewers. Yeah, yeah, as well. And the answer would be yes, Don. I would love to have a beer or coffee with you someday.
Yeah, I would love to. In fact, if you're ever in, I know you travel all over the world. If you're ever in Tennessee, we have a coffee shop right here in my little town that
Yeah.
has been selected as having the best coffee in Tennessee.
Oh man, I'm gonna walk in there like Buddy the Elf and say, "Congratulations, you have the best coffee in Tennessee."
Absolutely. We live in the foothills of the Smoky Mountains, so it's an
Ooh,
actual realistic possibility.
ah,
Indeed. Justin commented the author of Dune really hit the jackpot, created a lifelong work for himself and his family. Film adaptation currently in
yeah.
theaters. And this is just as we're getting ready to wrap up. I can't remember who to give proper credit to for this. But as opposed to a lot of industries that operate on a bell curve,
Yeah,
writing is a Pareto uh, industry. That is, there are a few people who make massively more
yeah,
than the regular folks like us who need to have a day job.
yeah,
So, folks, you're not going to make it, you're not likely to make it rich quick. For that, we always turn to Stephen King. He didn't make it quick,
yeah.
but he followed his passion.
He
And what I
did.
always think with that is if you're following the thing that makes your heart sing, you may or may not get rich, but at least your heart will sing.
Yeah, I love that.
Mm. Okay, well, we'll go ahead and wrap up here then today, folks. That this has, for me, been a fascinating conversation. I've taken advantage of Mark's time here a little longer than usual, and I'm very grateful for that, Mark. If you can hang out for just a second in the green room so I can thank you properly,
Of course.
and we will tell folks a little bit about next week. But again, thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you, Don.
And I'll be right back with you here in just a second. Now, I got tied up in talking here, and you know what that means, folks. Those of you who are following the usual, it means I didn't think to look for sure at the calendar for next week. So let me check that real quick. I think I know, but yes, next week is going to be Kim Farber will be our guest. Kim is one of the folks that I know from the Go Giver Success Alliance. I've really been impressed with her work, and that's going to be coming up next week. We will continue with the Alignment Show from week to week. We'll see where we can go. Always, we're seeking to help you to live your values so that you can value your life. And we're pleased to be able to be a part of that. So we will see you next week. That's it for this week's episode of The Alignment Show. What has it inspired you to do in your own life? Whatever it is, take action now and take the first step. It will help you to talk with a friend about what you're thinking. Share confidencecultivators.com to spread the goodness. And remember to live your values and value your life. We will see you next week on The Alignment Show.